Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people follow exact orders to spite someone. And in today's episode, entitled Karens are getting taught lessons left and right. And one OP tells the story about the time they basically destroyed a business by obeying someone. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. About a year back, I worked in a family restaurant. It was a Saturday night, and that meant my restaurant was busy, with all tables reserved, but it was all under control. I was hosting, and we had a family of 8 due in for a birthday. As I was making my way back to the station, a group of 8 people walked in. We'll call the leader BI for Big Idiot. The guy comes up to me and says, "Table for 8. To which I respond, "No problem. Sir, do you have a reservation?" The guy tells me, "No, I don't." And I reply, "Okay, well, I'm very sorry. We're fully booked for tonight. But I can take a reservation for another night if you wish." He then says to me, "No. If I wanted to eat here another night, I would have come here another night. Get me a table." Now, I was shocked that he was that rude to me. And I tell him, "I understand, sir. I do apologize. But I'm afraid that all of our tables are reserved for tonight. But you're more than welcome to take a seat at the bar if you'd like." The guy then says to me, "Well, what about that table over there?" Pointing to the birthday table. He says, "That's got 8 seats. We'll just sit there." I let him know, "I'm sorry, that table's reserved for another family. They're due here any minute. If you wait at the bar though, we have a 30-minute policy. If the family doesn't turn up, you can take their table." The guy loses it and says, "Well, none of those empty tables have a reserved sign on them. You just don't want us here. Just push those 2 tables together for us." The guy then points at 2 tables that weren't even in the same area. This is when Big Idiot then spots my manager walking past. He grabs her arm aggressively to speak to her, which went down about as well as a fart in an elevator. The guy screams at her saying, "Excuse me, there's a table over there that we would like to sit at, but this girl won't let us sit there. We traveled half an hour to get here, and I'm not happy. They don't have any signs on them to say they're reserved, so I don't understand. You're making paying customers wait for no damn reason." So my manager, without missing a single beat, says, "I'm sorry about that, sir. Please wait a second while I sort this out. I won't be long." At this point, Big Idiot is looking pretty pleased with himself. The guy puffs out his chest and he gives me the smuggest look, like he's won. That is, until he spots my manager coming out with the little reserve signs in her hand. She walks over to my station, checks the diary, and then walks over to each empty table and places a sign on each one. She then walks back over to the station and she says, "I'm so sorry our system confused you, sir. I've now rectified it. I do see that we have a free table tomorrow evening at the same time if you'd like to come back then." The Big Idiot then turned the most putrid shade of dark red you've ever seen in your life. He then states that he'll sit at the bar to wait to see if the table cancels. And as they're walking, the birthday table of 8 walks in. Big Idiot just huffs and he beckons his family to leave, at which point, my manager calls over and says, "If you'd like that table for tomorrow, please give us a call. Have a nice evening." They never came back. Oh, sweet, sweet karma, right? And you have to love a manager like that, not putting up with entitled customers. That said though, there's never an excuse to aggressively grab somebody walking by, and the guy's totally lucky that the manager was nice enough to allow him to stay in there after that. So this happened years ago when I was in the Navy. I had recently turned 21 and we decided to go to a bar that had a decent local cover band. So we show up and I present my ID. Grant you, clean cut and close shaved, I did not look 21. But my out-of-state ID was no good, and all I had was my military ID, which was a valid form of identification. And this is when the doorman decides that he can mess with me. The guy says to me, "This is fake, I'm keeping it." Hearing him say that, my eyes bugged out, and I said, "Dude, that's a military ID, give it back." The guy says, "Nope, this is mine now. $20 or you can F right off." I tell him I can't get back on base without it. He then says, "Then you'd better cough up $20 or you can F off." It's at this point, I get it. I see that it's a shakedown, and I'm thinking to myself, you're telling me to F off, huh? Okay, cue the malicious compliance. So with that, my buddy who drove us back to base, and we go into the Officer of the Day's office to report my stolen ID. Now, the Officer of the Day is a crusty old bastard, but he's fair. The guy only takes orders from the President and God. He listens to my story, and my buddy backs my story, and that's when his eyes narrow in an evil, evil way. He then says, "Chief, can you come in here? I got a present for you." Hearing him say that, I start to shake a little, thinking to myself, am I headed for a few days into the brig for losing my ID? There goes any chance of a bump to E4. The chief comes in, and he's told, OP here says that the doorman at Joe's Tavern took his ID, and he wants $20 to get it back. So you need to go pull a driver and one of those jarheads at the gate, and go down there and sort it out. The chief looks at me like fresh meat, and he says, come on you two, we're going for a ride. So with that, we all pile in the van, with a couple of Marines in uniform and sidearms. It's quiet on the way there, and the chief doesn't look too happy. He says, I can't believe I gotta deal with this. Well, at least I don't have to sit at the desk all night. So we roll up, and the place is packed. The doorman doesn't look so tough as the chief stalks up to him with 2 armed Marines flanking him. I'm just hanging back, and he says, OP, this the guy with your ID? I respond, yes, Chief. And it's at this point, the Chief gets up toe-to-toe with him. Chief is short and wide, but he's built like a brick wall. The gym-muscled doorman takes a step back, but the dude has nowhere to go in the little entranceway. The chief then says to him, give me his ID now or I will start looking for it myself. The doorman looks terrified. The ID's produced and then handed to me. The doorman is then ignored. The chief then pulls the door open and he looks at the room. He motions for the Marines to, quote, make a hole to the bar, make it wide. They all do so, calmly shouting to move people out of the way as the music and talk dies down. The chief then grabs a chair, stands on it, and then uses his parade ground voice and says, all active duty military. This site is now on the prohibited list. Pay your tab and get out. The chief then gets down and walks out with the Marines tailing him, and more than half the bar follows them out. Very few are active duty this far from base, but many are reserve or retired. They don't like crap like this either. The place went on the list, and it was still there when I transferred out 6 months or so later. Holy moly, imagine losing more than half of your customers all because a power-tripping doorman tried to hustle $20 from someone who looks like a pushover. Like, what do you even say to your boss at that point? And would you lose your job over that? Like, I can't see a place like that recovering, especially if it's dependent on a lot of military for revenue. And this person comments, I've heard similar stories from other veterans before. And this is the worst thing that can happen to a business that depends on the military. You don't F with the active duty or veterans. They will boycott your business into the ground, even if it's their favorite place in the world. We take care of those who take care of us. So this happened to me a few years ago, and I just remembered it recently. I was working at a restaurant waiting tables in a very affluent area on the Jersey Shore. Now, we had our fair share of entitled people who were under the impression that if you throw enough money around, you can do whatever you want and treat people however you want. And when your income depends on their tips, you just kind of have to deal with it. The restaurant I worked at had an outdoor dining and bar area that overlooked the ocean with an amazing view. During the summer, this was pretty much where everyone wanted to sit, rather than indoors. And for anyone who works someplace with outdoor dining, you know the one monkey wrench that can ruin a very profitable dinner shift: the weather. No matter how accurate the forecast says it's going to be, you can never know for sure. It's usually a giant mess to keep track of which tables moved inside due to weather, but we always handled it without any issue, until this one day. We had a large party booked one day in our indoor area that took up more than half of our tables. It was a 50th birthday, I believe. So our indoor capacity was limited. And even on top of the party, there were customers who were weary about the weather, so they decided to sit inside also. And then more and more people started sitting outside. My manager did a quick assessment and realized if it started raining, we would barely have enough room inside to accommodate everyone who was sitting outside. He told us that we had to stop seating our outdoor area and to start recommending our outdoor tables move inside because of the weather, just to be on the safe side. Of course, everyone was okay with it, except I had a table of 9 people who seemed fairly middle-aged and very wealthy. We're talking margaritas with top-shelf tequila, fancy-looking jewelry, purses, etc. Each end of the table seemed to be in their own conversation, not paying attention to the other. Upon hearing about the incoming rain, I go to the woman whom I thought was in charge, as she had the fakest tan of them all. And I tell her, let's call her Karen, "Ma'am, I'm really sorry, but because of the weather coming in and our limited seating inside, I'm going to have to move you folks inside so you don't get caught in the rain." This Karen is so entrenched in her conversation that she doesn't even register that I, a lowly waiter, was even talking to her. So I try again, and I say, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry for interrupting, but..." It's at this point she cuts me off exasperated, and she says, "What? What are you saying?" So I begin again. I tell her, "Ma'am, I'm sorry. Because of the weather coming in and our inside filling up, we need you to move inside. We have a table ready for you. I can move all your drinks and everything for you. You just have to..." It's at this point she snaps back with, "The only reason we came to eat here was to sit outside. We'll deal with the weather." So yeah, I realize she doesn't get what I'm saying, so I try again and I tell her, "Ma'am, just in case." She then goes from 0 to 100 and she yells, "Go away, we'll effing deal with it." Now, the woman yelled so loudly that all the other people heard. They didn't hear the prior exchange, but only heard the outburst, and they went back to their conversation, assuming that this must be normal behavior for her. And I think to myself, if she wants to deal with it on her own, you got it. So I begin to take the order. The finest cuts of steak, a few lobster tails, expensive stuff. I put the order in, and I look back at all the other tables who had moved inside, because they were all rational human beings. And my table of 9 entitled jerks were the only ones out there. This is when I heard the leathery-looking Karen say to the rest of the table, "Wow, we have the entire patio to ourselves. What luxury." After a while, I looked inside, and I saw that the table I held for them was taken by another party who had just walked in. The last table available. And just as the last butt hit the seat, I felt the best feeling I possibly could have felt at that moment. A glorious raindrop tapped me on the top of my head. And I'm thinking, oh, sweet glory. Within seconds, it went from beautiful blue skies to torrential downpour. Everybody at the table just grabbed their drinks and ran inside. After they shook themselves dry, they looked around and realized there was nowhere for them to sit. Most of them looked dumbfounded, like a child lost in a supermarket. And this is when Karen makes a beeline to me and she screams, "You! We need a table." And this is when I reply, "I'm sorry, ma'am. We're fully seated and we're on a wait for indoor seating." Karen then says to me, "Well, what are we supposed to do now?" And that led to me so eloquently saying to her, "Ma'am, as you said you would, you effing deal with it." I air quoted the effing deal with it part to really emphasize that that was her response. As I said that, everybody else at the table realized that was our interaction earlier, and Karen had dug their graves. I did feel bad for most of them, because if they had known the circumstances, they probably would have convinced Karen to move inside. But after she raised her voice and cursed at me, all bets were off. And as serendipity would have it, at that moment, their food came out, and we handed it to them, and they were just standing there. It was 9 people in damp clothes, holding a Cosmo in one hand and a plate of lobster in another, with nowhere to sit to eat. The rest of her party just convinced her to get some boxes for their food and to pay their check and leave. As I hand Karen the check, she smugly says to me, "Well, this will be reflected in your tip." To which I respond, "Ma'am, we implement a 20% tip on parties of 8 or more. It's our policy, and it's clearly stated on the menu." The woman paid, and they left with their boxed up food, leaving behind their half-full drinks. It was the best $60 I've ever made. What a story that was, and honestly, I'm just so baffled that nobody at Karen's table clued into what was going on around them. Like, how could you not see the weather changing and all of those tables moving inside? It's almost like every single one of them deserved what happened that day. So I used to wait tables at an upscale restaurant that was known to be the place to have your holiday or office parties. It's great money if you got the right group. The menus were preset, the wine and liquor was preset, and all was auto-tipped to 18%. All of it was in the contract the host signed pre-event. Usually, the host would make themselves known fairly early on, so you would know who to talk to if there was an issue, and who to give the check to at the end of the night. So one night, I'm splitting a party of 30 to 40 with another server. The event had top-tier food and mid-level wine and booze. Very nice. This is when a small group of 5 to 6 people arrive a bit ahead of schedule. It was 2 guys and 3 to 4 women. Not a problem. It's actually nicer if they slowly roll in so we can get the drink started. I walk over, introduce myself and the other waiter, and then ask for drinks. Now this was back in the early 2000s and Chads weren't a thing yet, but the 2 guys were the chattiest Chads. If they could have popped their collars in their suits, I'm sure these guys would have found a way. Chad number 1 says, so me and my bro are gonna start with a round of Johnny Walker Blue, and these ladies are going to have some expensive red wine. Chad number 2 then turns to the girls and says, once you have Johnny Blue, you can't drink anything else. It changes you, bro. I just say to them, if you'd like, I can put those on a separate tab. The event contract has Johnny Walker Black, not Blue. And the red wine selection for tonight is, I then tell them some less expensive wine. And this is when Chad 1 says, this is our party. Just get me what I ordered and don't question me again. Chad number 2 says, yeah, who do you think you are? You are some waiter. We have MBAs, so get us our drinks. So I then walk over to the other waiter and I tell him that we're in for a hell of a night, but the check should be nice. And for those that don't know, Johnny Walker Blue is 3 to 4 times the cost of Johnny Black. So one round of drinks for these people is well over $100. The whole night goes exactly as we thought. Nothing was good enough, the appetizers were crap, the food was horrible, not enough bread, too many bread plates, drinks were taking too long, the list goes on and on and on. And to make it worse, the Chads and company are all over the place. They're moving seats and making others move so they can talk to who they want. And this makes serving hell because we did everything by seat number. Surprisingly, most of the table was normal, not entitled people. They were impressed by the food and graciously ordered the drinks that were in the contract. One older gentleman at the end of the table from the Chads actually apologized for their behavior. The guy said they might have fancy degrees and good jobs, but you can't teach class. I love that guy. Finally, they're winding down. And after drinking almost a full bottle of Johnny Blue, along with all the other food and drinks, they have a very hefty check. And the waiter and I are excited to get paid. We start picking up the dessert plates and asking for last requests. This is when the nice older guy at the end of the table says to bring him the check. Not wanting any more interaction with the Chads than necessary, I just bring it to him. I tell him I can take care of it whenever, and go about clearing the table. A few minutes later, he calls me over and he says, maybe there was a mistake in ringing up the drinks. There's almost $600 for Johnny Blue, when the contract I signed for only included Johnny Black. There's also some single glasses of wine that are different from what we agreed upon. I say to him, there's no mistake, sir. That's what was ordered and drank. And I want to note, the guy was being awesome and I did feel bad. He then says to me, why did you give the drinks to them when we clearly had a contract? I respond, I apologize, sir, but they told me that this was their party. And since I was just a waiter, to shut up and to do what I was told. So I did. I'm sorry. I took them at their word. It's at this point I point them out and he calls them over. And what follows was the greatest ass chewing I've ever been a witness to. He goes on about how he was doing something nice, but apparently that wasn't enough. About how horrible their behavior was that night and how he's so ashamed for them. But my favorite line was how you see a person's true color in how they treat people that work for them, and they had shown theirs. He then calls me back over and he says, "Apparently, I thought this was my party. I guess I was wrong. This is their party and they'll be taking care of the check. Oh, and please up the gratuity to 25%. You earned it." He then turns around and walks off, leaving the guys with the check. All in all, it was about $3,000, and I've never seen two grown men look so defeated. I freaking love this malicious compliance so much, and honestly, just knowing that the arrogant duo got what they deserved in the end by somebody who was actually in power is freaking amazing. And hey, there's no reason to be upset about it. I mean, with their MBA degrees, a $3,000 check should be nothing, right? I just hope those two learned a lesson that day. I work in a casual fine dining restaurant in a downtown area. Prices aren't crazy, but it's high enough that we don't get a super young crowd. I would say that the average age of our dinner crowd is 30 to 60, although it varies more on the weekend. I only include this information so you understand why I didn't initially ask for identification, even though you should always check. That said, on Thursday night, a table of 4 comes in for early dinner. 2 Karens and their daughters, and I'm thinking, excellent. I'm ready for them to split entrees and tip me 15%. Not the worst type of table, if we're being honest, but nonetheless. They order a pitcher of sangria, and I tell them I'll be right back with that. To which Mama Karen then says to me, "You really aren't gonna check these girls' IDs? Her birthday was last month. Aren't you supposed to check anyone who looks under 40? Are you new here or something?" The woman said that all smug, and of course she's correct. Of course I should have asked for identification, even though the girls were with their mothers, and I was being lazy by assuming they were of age, since their moms didn't stop them from ordering drinks. I agree with her, and I tell her that actually I'm supposed to check all IDs, regardless of age, and then proceed to look at all 4 of the ladies' IDs. Unfortunately for Mama Karen, her birthday was a few days previously, and her ID had expired. In the state of Michigan, it's illegal to serve alcohol to anyone with an expired ID, regardless of age. So I had to deny Mama Karen a glass for the sangria, while her daughter and friend shared a pitcher. But it doesn't end there. Karen threw a fit when I denied her a glass of sangria. She informed me that she, a business owner, is more aware of the law than I, a mere server, could ever be. She then said for me to just do my job and to bring her a glass, and that my generation doesn't respect elders and blah blah blah. Her daughters were embarrassed, but I tried to move past it and serve them the rest of their meal normally. Karen kept huffing and puffing, but she said no when I offered to bring a manager over. Now, I really didn't have malicious intentions. However, it did feel good that Karen's antics backfired on her. You could tell that she did not like me. That is frickin' hilarious, and the best part is, Karen did it all to herself, so she only has herself to blame. Like, is it bad when I say that I love it when a nasty person tries to ruin someone's day and it totally backfires on them? It's just so satisfying. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled People episode, where a Karen stalks somebody and marries them. It's such a wild story, so go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.